Seems to be a bit of a lag there.
Yeah, my machine's going a bit crazy here tonight.
Are you using a PC instead?
Need to get... You get crack on. I'm going to restart.
Welcome, everyone. I hope you are well. Thank you for joining us this evening. So we've got two very special guests. And what we're hoping to do is to give you some top tips and advice on the new remote education Ofsted news report. What I'd like you to do is, if you've got any questions, stick them in the chat and I'll do my best to relay them to our guests. I'm going to hand back over to Mark because I know he's going to do a better introduction than I will.
You say better introduction.
Oh, and you're gone again.
Have I really?
No, and he's gone. And this is, ladies and gentlemen, ideal time for a technical hitch. I'm glad I can see my two guests backstage who are having a little bit of a giggle. That's fine. No, Mark, you're still pixelated. There you are. Hello.
Okay, can you hear me now? Is my microphone on?
Your microphone is on. I'm so glad that didn't happen to me because I would be absolutely struggling to cope there.
The thing is, though, actually, one of the things I often share in the work I do with schools and things, you know, is that I like it when things actually go wrong, because things do go wrong with technology. I like to be able to let things...
Oh, no. This is bad timing for technology. Mark, are you there? No, he's not. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the reins. This is crazy. So hopefully he'll come back and join us. But I'm hoping that what you'll get today is some good advice and some good tips. As I said, stick the questions in the chat and we will get back to you. Now, I'm going to bring on our guests because I'm not too sure how long Mark is going to be able to sort out his technology, and I'm just going to ask them a bit about who they are, what they do, and then we'll crack on. So, adding our guests to the stream. Hello, guys. Are you okay?
Good evening.
I'm so sorry. Well, this is not what I was expecting at all. Mark is trying to get back in, so hopefully he does. But just in case he struggles, we're just going to crack on. Hi, I've let our guests in.
I can see. If it's all right with you, Zina, go on, and I'll be back in a few moments.
Of course, that's not a problem. See you later. See you soon. Okay, so welcoming our guests, Al and Yusuf. Can I ask Al if you introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Hi there. We can get away with all sorts now. Mark's offline, can't we? We can go off on all sorts of tangents. Hi there. Yeah, I'm Al Kingsley. I'm chair of a number of multi-academy trusts, sit on the Regional Schools Commissioners Head Teachers Board, and I'm also MD of NetSupport, a company that specialises in educational technology solutions. So all things EdTech and education.
Sounds fab. And what made you get into that field? You just tech.
It's been a passion for a long time. I think, like most of us, often, you know, children become a driver that you really have a passion in that area. But I think in terms of being able to actually measure when things have an impact and make a change, where there's an opportunity to collaborate more. Education's something I like to always to talk about. You know, in the corporate world, when we come up with great ideas, we tend to keep them to ourselves. They're a little bit of our own specialism. And in education, the first thing we do when something works is share it with our peers, and that's really nice, refreshing balance, I think, if you work in the corporate sector as well.
Yeah, no, that's fabulous. Thank you. Yusuf.
Hello.
Hi. Could you please introduce yourself? What do you do? Where are you?
Well, I'm currently in Cardiff, and so hopefully my internet connection doesn't do the same as Mark's, otherwise it's going to be a very interesting show indeed. I'm sure it was planned. I think this is a practical session, really, of what to do where something doesn't quite go to plan. And so, there's a lot of learning that's going to take place here. So my name's Yusuf Ibrahim, and I'm the Associate Dean of Teaching and Learning at Cardiff and Vale College. The college has a number of lecturers who are currently delivering online education at the moment, a mixture of live lessons and also asynchronous lessons too. And so very much been on that journey of looking at what online learning is, how to try deliver it successfully, and also maybe some of the pitfalls in there. We've been experimenting with different approaches, and as we have a good 700 odd staff who teach online now, we've got quite a large test space, if you like, in terms of just seeing what's working and what are things we can do differently to support our learners in what's obviously a very, very difficult situation.
Absolutely, but I think this is really a really good opportunity for people to learn a new skill, and certainly teachers up and down the country have kind of been thrown into this situation where you could have probably got away with not having the fabulous best ICT skills, but now it's like, okay, we really need to get onto this. So yeah, thank you guys. I'm going to crack on with the first question. So what constitutes good learning, remote education? Sorry, Al, if I can come to you.
It's that's one of those questions that seems quite short, but could mean 101 different things.
I'll give you 2 minutes.
Oh, damn it. Right. Well, let's see if we can cover some of the bits. I'm very much, I position myself as the education sponge because I'm really picking up on the feedback from all of our different teachers. And I suppose the first and simple answer is, unlike sometimes the best intention of the guidance is, it really isn't one size fits all. So I would start by saying the best on, remote learning, remote education is something that suits the particular learners and students that you've got the other end of the connection. And that means that actually it will be different for different types of cohorts. I think there are different strands. Obviously, ultimately, in order to have any kind of successful experience, you want to have engagement. Doesn't mean that it has to always be synchronous or asynchronous, but you want to have a level of engagement and interaction, something that actually creates an activity. And I think often the thing that we always talk about as teacher confidence has been rising is about having that kind of feedback loop. So that sense of we're creating an online experience. We're setting and being really clear in terms of the structure and expectations of the lessons. We're setting tasks where the learners, either in real time or are going away and working on projects, are able to send that back, and we can create feedback quickly and effectively to our learners. And of course, at different age groups, that engagement is at very different levels. So certainly at EYFS and Key Stage 1, we are much more dependent on parental engagement and how we effectively communicate aspirations with them. I'd argue potentially there we're also looking about being quite broad-minded in terms of actually there's lots of different kinds of learning. Not all of it's directly curriculum related, but it's constructive and it's productive in terms of young people's engagement. We could be throwing in strands in terms of looking and saying actually the areas where we've seen there's been some really good impact is where we've able to foster peer-to-peer, so student group working and activities that allow them to maintain that kind of connectivity. And then for other aspects of our school, whether it's our SEND or we have alternative provision across some of our trusts, we've got different learners with challenges where clearly it's about chunking and breaking things down into bite-sized chunks. And the measures of success start pretty much with the fact that they're actually there and engaging in some level, and we're actually able to develop that. And I think that's why, I think most schools, I hope, are being quite rational and reasonable and saying there may be a target expectation, but let's start a realistic measure is, are we on that journey? Are we moving from where we were to more hours of engagement with our children at different levels? We obviously want it to be effective and actually have some form of impact. So we need to figure out how best to measure it. And again, we can do that in more traditional ways with our secondary learners in terms of how we can do quick quizzes and assessments with them. With our EYFS Key Stage 1, we're looking at how we can get parents to capture remote observations and evidence of student learning to feed back to the teachers so that they can see that they're actually embedding some skills. And the thing that I think is most, I think it's a real credit to the profession and the education is you start this conversation and that question, and there are so many different strands. There are so many different types of learners, and so many different scenarios that actually the breadth of adaptability and flexibility is huge. And so I'd say number one for me, don't try and do too much too quickly, and actually have confidence in the most important thing, which is actually it's the teacher to student interaction. No matter how that might be, that's where the learning actually happens.
I certainly thank you so much for that response. I certainly see a huge difference with the remote learning for my children who go to primary school. From the first time to second time round, they've totally got a grip on what they want the children to do, how they want it to do it. So it's much more interactive. My son is greeted with a video from his teacher in the morning, with the other children who are in school saying, hello, you know, we're here, we miss you. And it is a really good way of keeping that connection and that engagement. And also, you know, me and my husband have been taking photographs a day of some of the work they've been doing, and we get almost immediate feedback. Oh, what, Alex, this is wonderful, you know, well done. So
but that really highlights that journey, because when we go back to March, April, if I think primary, you know, lots of primaries were trying to think on their feet, and so it was online storytelling, recorded videos, and it was quick ways to engage with parents, to set activities. And I think what we've seen is and it's been tough because schools have kind of had to get used to some form of remote education, and then back into semi-normal, albeit very much bubblyfied, in-school experience, and now flipping back to that remote experience again. And I think it does highlight the amount of skills acquisition and confidence that's been built in terms of the different tools that are being used. So, you know, I think we always have to look and say, actually, it's as important to measure how far you've come as to how far you need to be looking in the forward direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Yusuf, did you want to add anything to that?
I mean, it's an incredibly comprehensive response, Al, and I agree with absolutely everything that you said, particularly the points around it not being one size that fits all. I think particularly, and Zena, you're speaking about it at the start in terms of the different skill sets that people came into this situation with. If anything, this has acted as the catalyst, hasn't it, for people to sort of decide, right, I've got no choice now. I'm now having to swim, and I've just got to take those armbands off that I used to have, and I've just got to, and they have, and people have been progressing their digital skills, and have been progressing in delivering online learning that's engaging more learners. And again, what was said in terms of at the beginning, it was very much meeting a need that was a very acute need with no real training and input other than what people had previously done. So wherever people's schools and institutions' digital transformation strategies were, that's where they were, and wherever they had got up to on that journey is where they were, and that's what they were implementing in the classroom. And I think we saw, just like we saw a national coming together, we saw very much professional coming together, and a recognition from parents as well. I certainly from the college perspective, I know from the school's perspective as well, I think parents are very much bought into this idea that with that as a professionals, we're trying to meet the needs as best as we can. And at the start, it was from the college's perspective, we were in a position where because we'd already migrated to Teams and had this sort of, I mean, we're dealing with older learners here. We're dealing with post 16, and so therefore a lot of the learning was taking place via Teams, but it'll be Teams in lesson. So in lesson, the resources are on Teams, are on a virtual platform. So there was a bit of a natural transition to that being outside of the classroom as well. But we always had ambitions to want to improve that blended learning, as it was then called. It was probably going to have a new definition now of the learning outside of the classroom. Good intentions, and it had some good examples, but then all of a sudden, nearly everything could be blended learning, and it turned into that. So in terms of what makes good online learning, again, just want to echo the points really made by Al, which is, for me, it's about the progression of those learners. And I don't mean progression from a data-driven quantitative perspective here. I mean looking at where that learner is, taking into account what tools we now have, and trying then to get them to the next step. That's what we do physically when we're with learners, and that's what we're trying to do online. And I think if we can boil it down to that principle of trying to understand where they are, and I think, but with that comes some problems, because to understand where learners are now is a bit more challenging in the online world. So the question then is, how do you understand where they are? Is it accurate? Is it a place where we're confident that is their level? And then how do you measure that progress as well? So it does raise other challenges that go deeper into it. But ultimately, for me, it's a question of that personal progression. And one size doesn't fit all. And equally, I think, and I've seen and experienced the issues of trying to transpose what works in the physical environment directly onto the online environment. And I certainly think certain teaching styles as well have different consequences. If you've got maybe quite an authoritarian teaching style, which can be prevalent amongst a lot of lecturers and teachers, that is sometimes quite challenging to put online, because automatically they're controlled in the way in which the dynamic of how you would organize your classroom. That I saw some challenges there, but equally. Teachers who are used to like lots of group work and lots of sort of potentially like what you say may freedom on the other end equally found that very challenging, because how do you organize group work when they're no longer in groups? So a lot of challenges are thrown up. But for me, the fundamentals are knowing where that learner is, understanding the context to which they're in, what tools you have at your disposal, and trying to get them to the next step.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, I love that idea of the type of teacher you are physically is going to have to change virtually, isn't it? And I'm a big fan. Mark will tell you, I'm a huge fan of relational practice and restorative practice. So your relationship skills are going to be crucial when you're delivering lessons online. So yeah, thanks, Yusuf. Mark, welcome back. I know you've been here for a little while. I'm handing over to you.
Well, as I was trying to say, when things were all going a bit pear-shaped, I do like to, represent when things do go wrong sometimes, just to show what you can do to actually fix those sorts of things. In my head, I was thinking, what would I say to somebody else? And it was like, have you tried turning it off and on again? And clearly that worked a treat there. So brilliant stuff. Welcome to the show, Al and Yusuf. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I work on the basis that Zena has done a lovely introduction for you both, and all of that. Big shout out to our guests this evening as well, who are joining us from viewing this evening. So thanks to Carl Denton, long-time friend. Thanks for joining us. He's sharing that they're using Class Dojo in their primaries. One of the great things, as he alludes to and highlights in his further response, is that one of the beautiful things about Class Dojo is that opportunity for parents to be able to then use that to feed back to staff as well and get involved in that triangulation. And you mentioned the importance of relationships a second ago, Zena, but making sure there's strong relationships between home, school, and child, that wrapper of care around the learners is super important. Thank you to Debug Edu as well, sort of mirroring the comment that Yusuf made as well about it's a shame it's taken a crisis to get learners to go digitally. We've been trying to train people for years. Absolutely. Welcome to everyone joining us this evening. Thank you to Sarah, who's joining us as well. Thank you to Sarah as well. She shares that lesson time can be more limited. So lesson time has to be maximized, and talks about the importance of flipped learning approaches, which are really useful, particularly when you're thinking about students who might be sharing devices at home, and that sort of links onto that idea of the importance of asynchronous activities that don't require everyone to be in the room at the same time. Although obviously, as we know, that sort of thing is really important. So thank you for taking the mantle while I was turning it off and on again, Zena. Really appreciate that. I'm going to move into another question, if I may. This evening's session comes off the back of a report which came out earlier this week from Ofsted, talking about what's working well in remote learning. And there's been a few documents coming around. I mean, there are many people sharing advice and courses you can go on and all the rest of it. But I do like to hear from people who are not only leading on these sort of things, but supporting teachers as well, which is why we're great to have Yusuf and Al joining us this evening. I want to jump into a question, because it isn't easy for most people. And like Yusuf said, had to just take the armbands off and actually start swimming. I want to start with a question back to you, Yusuf. I've worked with you at Cardiff and Vale, 700 or so lecturers in the college in Cardiff. What common barriers can there be, do you think, to remote education that the teachers and lecturers can encounter?
Yeah, just like all these questions, there's so many different ways in which you can look at them, that they're incredibly broad questions. I think in terms of the most pertinent barrier, it is confidence. And that's for many reasons. Like, for example, if we use this as an example here, and Mark obviously had some technical difficulties, and you dropped out and then came back in. I had a really similar experience when we have a winter festival at the end of the year, end of the calendar year. So I was in front of 350 attendees giving my presentation, and before December the 2nd, I think, and we had our presentation on December the 10th, December the 18th, and I didn't realize this had happened. Teams removed the cap, or put a cap on the number of people who could join a meeting. So it used to be unlimited. Even though they said there was a cap, you used to be able to have 600-700 people joining an event, and you could actually go quite nicely with that. They put a cap on, and I didn't know. And we found out, how are you going to test it? The only way you'll test it is if you actually try to get 351 into a situation where you can't. And it caused havoc. It was a live event in front of the whole college. I was there, and in a very similar situation to here. But and I think it's the confidence of things going wrong, and it's the confidence of what do you do when things go wrong. Therefore, I emphasize it is really useful to have seen you go out and come back in. The world hasn't changed too much. We've all got a few seconds older. We're all still here, and we've just picked up from where we've got to. But I think that was the biggest barrier from a professional perspective, is how do I even begin to use the analogy against swim? How I haven't started using armbands for some of them. And so how am I even going to start swimming? And I think that was the biggest barrier, was the confidence. And so in terms of trying to remove that barrier, try to alleviate that, sessions where you're getting lecturers to present in front of themselves, getting them used to the technology through training events and through doing things like online EdFest and things like this as well, where they're using the technology and having to present. So doing exactly what we're doing, but for an audience themselves. So I definitely advise departments, faculties to get together like this, have a meeting, and just have a go at presenting each to each other, sharing screen with each other, muting each other's mics, and no matter what platform you're using, getting to know what the strengths and weaknesses and limitations of that platform is. Every platform has got its strengths and every platform has got its limitations, and just getting to know that. And I think that was the biggest barrier, was the confidence and that fear factor going in.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, that certainly resonates with the work I've been doing since I stopped teaching full time. A lot of the work that I've been doing is about raising the confidence levels. I mean, Al, you know about the Mandanac and Klein work, about moving people from survival mode right through up to being able to innovate at the end. What are your perspectives on these barriers? Have you got anything different to add to that, Al?
I think if Yusuf's with the armbands, I've still got one of the noodles in the shallow end, and I'm splashing around seeing where I can head. I think most of us would agree that one of the biggest barriers has been teacher confidence, and obviously that's just been kind of shared. I think the challenge has been, how do you translate that ability to develop confidence at the same time with the biggest challenge right now, which is time? You know, if everybody had the luxury of pausing and going away and doing some CPD and professional development, wouldn't that be lovely? And in effect, what we're saying is, no, we need you to be delivering some form of online provision, as well as providing provision for those key workers and vulnerable children. And time's the missing link. And I suppose many have discovered, and again, I'm a magpie of picking up on different people's ideas and trying to share them on. Lots of people, and Yusuf kind of alluded to it, starting off by doing a nice team session to one yourself and recording it is a great way to develop confidence. But actually you create an exemplar which you can use for your students, and in many cases that's a really helpful platform and practice. But also you can kind of connect the dots, and of course when staff don't have the luxury of time to collaborate, connecting the dots is just that next step, which is, and how do I make that accessible via stream or within my Google ecosystem so that other staff can access that? Because we're not going to have the luxury of peer assess and learning walks in quite the same physical sense. So actually, how can we all be developing and providing both an opportunity to learn and sharing resources for our peers? And I'd argue, whilst there's been lots of challenges, there have been positives. And one of the things that many of our school leaders and our staff have been sharing is that by the necessity to use technology more effectively, for many, collaboration has developed far quicker than it did pre-COVID. And that collaboration has facilitated sharing. Now, we know teachers are top of the list when it comes to being sharers, but actually the tools that we're trying to talk about using effectively to engage with our learners are the same tools that allowed us to create quickly that content to share with our peers. And it comes back to confidence, doesn't it? Because if you can create things and practice on your own where you don't have the pressure of 30 eager eyes, and you can also look at what your peers are doing and get that reference point about and pick up ideas. And let's be honest, we all develop by looking at others and validating what bits we want to cherry pick and put into our own practice. That I think is a really important one. So I think one of the key ones for schools is facilitating that collaboration and at the same time again, recognizing with that confidence curve of developing it, it comes back to our one size fits all. Many of the schools that have been most successful are not the ones who've prescriptively said, every member of staff in every lesson to every cohort, your expectation of teaching hours, time, format for the day is, and recognizing that if we were in the room, we'd be trusting the professional, the front of class, to adapt the way they deliver things to the cohort and what they're actually, and the particular topic of the day. And that same rule kind of needs to apply in an online sense. And I think it's having the confidence to do that. And it's something we might come on to, but I'd say also a good leadership strength right now is having the confidence to let staff take risks, try stuff. There's a double-edged sword there, because I'm, like many will be saying, it's counterintuitive to someone that develops software and new tools. Don't try too many new things right now. Try and bed in what you know and get that really embedded within the school. But also in terms of ideas, we've got to take risks, try new things and see which things actually have an impact and not. So it's that kind of finding the balance on all of these things. But it ties in with the confidence bit, but then how you actually do something about it.
Can I say something? Because I thought that made a really good point, because the chat's going a bit crazy here. But I love the idea that encouraging staff to take risks is really important, because we've been telling staff before, pre-COVID, take risks, it's fine. And how do we give them that confidence to do that? Somebody's mentioned, hold on a second, it's Debu who says it's time that school leaders need to provide the time for teachers to learn. And it's that whole idea of that their professional development, where is this time? And crucially, CPD has always been given towards teaching and learning, or, one or other focus for the school. But actually, teachers are needing that time now more than ever to learn technology and learn how to develop this skill.
I'd argue that the definition of CPD has probably changed as a result of what's happened. For many schools, and I'm using a very sweeping term here, so I apologise to any of those that I offend, but for many, CPD comes under the wrapper of those inset days throughout the year. Yeah. And actually, we all know with any technology, particularly, or tools that we use, confidence comes from repetition and practice, and actually just those very short snapshot few hours of something, whilst it can kickstart. And for some who've got confidence, they can develop it. For others, it's just not enough. So I think we need to kind of redefine what CPD is. And we also need to redefine who CPD applies to. We've got so many projects where schools have developed new technology, staff have started using it. Problem, let's go to the IT team. They know nothing about the product. They need the CPD as well to make sure that they can support the tools effectively. And I think it does revise that kind of priority. Do you spend less on kit and more on training to make sure that, and this is a topic Mark and I have talked to death as part of digital strategy, that actually, you've got to look back to move forwards. You've actually got to make sure you're getting the most out of what you've got before you try and add more to the mix. Otherwise, you're never going to be successful. So I think all those are interwoven in terms of just reflecting on those aspects. And if you don't give people the confidence and the tools to use something, how can you possibly then expect to get that development right the way through to innovation with the tools that are being used?
Absolutely.
No, I completely agree. I think people in my position, with my sort of CPD hat and work I do supporting schools, one thing I've been trying to, I think it's incumbent upon people like me to actually think differently about how we work with schools as well. One school I was working with, for example, at the beginning of this term, I did an hour's inset, but I did 2 hours inset. I did 2 hours at the same time. I had a sort of introductory top tips for using Teams and OneNote and all these things, which I recorded as a video, which most staff could watch asynchronously and jump into. And then as it was a video, they could watch it back again and again and again and again. But concurrently, I was meeting with the sort of teachers who already had good digital skills, so they could really dig into me and use me. I had the things I wanted to run through with them in that hour, but I covered far more with them in that hour than I would have done with the entire body of staff. staff. And the beauty of that is those teachers who've are already pretty confident with their digital skills can take that more bespoke training where they get loads and loads from me, but then use that as a vehicle to cascade it down to colleagues as they try those things out, because they've already got that confidence. So they're already at sort of a mastery stage and a stage where they're starting to innovate and do all these sort of things. And I think that the more that people can use the tools that are available to think about how they can provide CPD in more impactful ways. I often have conversations with head teachers about inset days. It's lovely to stand there and go da-da to 100 plus staff, but how much impact actually does a school get or a college get from that sort of support and training? It might be that it's a lovely day for fun, and it might be there to inspire staff and all these sort of things, and that's important. But if you want real deep impact, it needs to be able to, we wouldn't do a one-size-fits-all lesson with no sort of strategies for supporting the less able or the more able, would we? So why would we want to have a one-size-fits-all approach with our staff? There's a bell curve, whether you're dealing with 15-year-olds or 50-year-olds, isn't there? So yeah, so I've gone off on one there a bit. But, did you want to jump into another question, Zena?
Yes, please. So my next question for Yusuf, please, if that's all right. Where do you see remote education and learning in the future?
Oh, so that's actually one of my favourite questions. So I think COVID has obviously changed things, as everyone knows, and the world is going to be forever impacted with a lot of positives. And I think one of the positives is that the way in which we view things now, and the way in which we look at education, or even the way when you look at the workforce and how they view their roles or whatever profession it is, has changed because of the necessity of having some element online. There are very few industries and professions that have not been impacted, but unless your work necessitates on-site work for whatever reason all the time. So I think that because of the catalyst, because of where we've got to, we definitely want to be in a situation where we've learned those lessons, we've continued to develop those skills. Now we've got a skill base that is a lot higher than it was last year in terms of where teachers are and be able to develop that. And also the innovation within curriculum design and curriculum planning and lesson design and lesson planning, that whole formula of what we're going to do live and what they can do outside of the classroom has completely changed. So I definitely see a world where we retain some of the best bits of online learning and online professional development as well, because before it used to be, can we fit everyone in the canteen? Can they do, what if we've got multiple campuses? Well, no, that doesn't matter now. We can do elements of that online. And so I definitely see a lot of positives in terms of there being that blended approach. And also the other thing in terms of looking at what's happening within the college as well, when you're looking at the asynchronous delivery and the things the sort of things we speak about, I was right. If we're now in front of students, that's actually quite valuable now. The value of that and almost the preciousness of that has been increased. So what are we doing to add value to those learners who are actually occupying the same space and time? We didn't really think about it like that before. And therefore, the other part of the question is, well, what things can we condense? Is it the case that my 5 history teachers need to teach the same thing at the same time, like Mark was alluding to, or is it the case that one of them can really nail it in an asynchronous model and send that to them, and then when they're in the lesson, we're asking them deep questions, we're getting to think about things, we're getting to engage with what they have seen beforehand, and it sort of comes to where if you're just going to talk to them. I don't mean when I say just talk to them, obviously speaking and that relational interaction is very important. But if we're speaking to them, is that something we could have done outside of the lesson, had it ready for them to watch or listen to on a podcast, and they come in and it's about what I was speaking about before, about their progression, where they are adding value to that. And so I very much see that as being a shift, like a paradigm shift really, in terms of the way in which we are adding knowledge to our learners and the baseline that we're expecting them to come in with. And I'd also say, on a final point on that, meetings. We don't no longer have to do. We used to be a bit of a novelty where a member of staff might video in. Well, that's no longer the case now. We can join meetings within reason from different locations. So I think there's definitely been a monumental shift in terms of the mindset, and it'll be very sad if we look in a year's time to see we reverted back to the models of teaching pre-COVID. I don't think we will, but that's how I see it going.
Oh, thank you so much, Yusuf. I love that idea of added value to learning, and independent thinking are huge about there is always another way, and I feel that if we do go back, that would be an absolute crying shame. One thing that will definitely change are snow days. We're never going to have a snow day at home again, because today in Leeds we were covered in snow and we were all sent home. However, we were working remotely having our lessons, so snow days will never be the same.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there, Zena. I want to jump in because I'm mindful of the time, and want to get through a few more of these questions. Al, obviously, given our collective roles, I know you will have a good answer to this, but I know this is a big issue on a lot of teachers' minds and parents. So I want to jump into a question about safeguarding, if that's okay to you, Al. If you so safeguarding is really really important. So remote education and safeguarding, how can staff and students keep themselves safe? I mean, obviously there's software available, which you may mention, but what can, you know, you've got any sort of rough outlines and general sort of guidance and rules that would be a good sort of compass upon which to follow?
Well, I mean, there's two different strands, and it's a really, really important question, you know. And you reference software that often is used within the school setting in terms of that kind of filtering and monitoring that goes on. Obviously, that has a role to play in some settings, but when we're talking about learners at home using a range of different devices, that ability to control and manage is somewhat diminished for understandable reasons. So, you know, I think ultimately the number one priority, and it's already partially woven through the curriculum, is really that focus on broader digital citizenship skills, understanding and setting expectations in terms of the safe way to interact and engage online, how to set up the space when you've got a webcam enabled, being aware of the implications of the information that you share. And we have to be mindful as schools that we've got safeguarding in terms of what content we're capturing or recording when students are, you know, away from the classroom. We've got an obligation in terms of where we're storing that data and who else might have access to it. We had a bit of a rush for the right reasons to lots of different solutions online that teachers were looking for in March and April. And some of those on reflection may or may not have been the best choice, but they were engage quickly for the right reasons, you know. And we can talk about locking down and controlling, but if we talk about the real pressures right now, the real pressures are whatever the learning approach is, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, we're always going to have pressures, certainly for different cohorts, in terms of accessibility of tech to keep that level playing field. And the first thing we have to recognize is if we understand that at different age groups they will be engaging on laptops, on tablets, on smartphones, we're not going to have the ability to block the rest of the outside world to them, particularly as some of their learning will involve online research and developing their own critical thinking skills. So I think it has to wrap around how we interweave with this new vision of technology right now playing a greater role in the learning experience, about how we signpost that digital citizenship skills, you know. And we've only got to see what's happening in the broader world to say now more than ever we want to try and make sure our young people are able to understand the risks of what they share and where, and also develop the critical skills to challenge what they see and understand that it's, you know, whether it's real or not, you know. And I think there's no shortcut to that, regrettably, you know. Being involved in a sector where we also develop, you know, those kind of tools, you know, I'd wish those tools weren't required. I'd wish that we didn't need to worry about filtering and monitoring, and that all children have those skills. But it's, of course, a blend. It's a blend about best practice. And some schools are very quick off the block in terms of just guides about thinking about what you've got in the background, what you're sharing with a webcam, what information you're pushing through. And it's about, again, building confidence and levels on those things so that it becomes second nature. I'd argue that also ties in, particularly with the lower age groups, with the work that schools have done, sometimes intentionally, sometimes by the mother of necessity, with parental engagement and family engagement, so that parents understand what their expectations are and they're there to look at what their child's using and when and how they're sharing. And it becomes this kind of collaborative team effort. You know, in many families, the relationship and dynamic between schools has really blossomed. You know, there's been huge pressures on families, as there have been for teachers, but I think that has really been an opportunity to blossom. You know, and I come back to the other point about snow days. I hope we won't lose our activities out in the snow. But I think all these things, where we look at technology, we've got two strands. The focus and conversation, for the right reasons, is about all these things interweave about how do we continue to deliver the right experience for our young people, a platform, an opportunity to learn. But we need to be realistic and say there's a second strand, which is just as important, so we can do that effectively, which is which bits of these technology and tools are we introducing now that post-COVID we can still use that allow us to save time, because time unlocks the ability to do more of the good stuff and less of the administrative and the difficult stuff. And there are different tools that we've discovered and are starting to use where we said, hang on a second, that really does save time, and therefore irrespective of where the students might be in 6 months, 12 months time, we can still use some of that technology to work smarter, so we can actually unlock more time for the important stuff front of class.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. There's loads that resonate. I mean, the issue around parental engagement and parents getting support as well. I mean, that was highlighted earlier by Carl as well. I love their approach there about opening their IT support phone lines to parents so they can get a bit of support and things as well. And it goes to what you're saying there as well, actually, about that wrapper again, the relationships between all these key stakeholders in the lives of our young people. That old adage about sort of crossing the road, you know, I think we're all parents, so you know. But even if we weren't, as teachers, we are in loco parentis, and you know, at some point in time, we need to let the children cross the road by themselves. But we would still guide them to do so at a pedestrian crossing rather than doing it at a busy juncture, you know. And so I think that analogy sort of really rings true. Zena, so again, be mindful of time and things. If you'd like to ask another question, that'd be great. But before you do, guests joining us this evening in the chat, please do ping through any questions you've got for our experts this evening. We'd love to have any, you've been making some fantastic comments, as we've alluded to, from Sarah and Debug Edu and Carl and Sarah and everybody else. But if you have got any questions, please bring them through, because we'd be delighted to take them and share to our guests this evening. Zena, over to you.
So we've obviously had various guidance from various sectors over the last few months, and certainly in the last week. But to what extent do you think that the remote education guidance from Ofsted this week was helpful, Yusuf?
So I think it's always good to have a starting point in terms of providing guidance, and I think now that we are, well, we're into January now, and we've wanted teaching to start at probably March 20th, 2020. So it is a case of taking stock. There are definitely some useful elements in there. And I think that what they're aiming to do is to try and show how education can be delivered through a remote curriculum just as effectively in some cases it can away from the classroom. There are some things in there that I think that are important. For example, the headline of keeping it simple, and you've got to balance that really, because in terms of the stuff that Al was saying about taking risks, we want to take risks, but at the same time we want to take risks which are calculated, or risks that at that pedestrian crossing, if you like, probably just trying to, so you got a bit of a roadmap ahead of you when you're doing that. There are some bits in there in terms of the myths where it's different. So one of the first things they say is that remote education is fundamentally different to other forms of teaching and learning. That's a myth. I agree with that. That actually remote education should be part and parcel of a total education package. We wouldn't expect necessarily to, there are some institutions that deliver completely remotely, but in a sort of traditional mainstream education setting, it's certainly something alluded to my point earlier, you want to take away from. But I also think that there are some bits where I do feel that they could have elaborated a little bit more. So, for example, the point about one of the myths saying the most important thing isn't people's engagement. I think that needs just a bit of a definition there, because unless you understand the research underpinning that in terms of where that came from, that's very much trying to allude to the idea of engagement holding their attention, as opposed to engagement with them engaging in work or engaging in learning, engaging in collaboration. So I do think there are some things there that require a bit of elaboration. The stuff and feedback and true practices, just going over that now, I was pleased. But I also think that as we are now a few months into this, I do think it's a little bit superficial talking about quizzes and assessment tools there. I think that we could go a little bit deeper in there, maybe think about some of the taxonomy stuff, solar taxonomy, for example, of how you actually use technology. And one of the lines I would like to have had in there is that we can and should have the ambition to take learners through that taxonomy of knowledge through to understanding, evaluation and application, just as much in the remote world as we do in the physical world. So yeah, it's mixed for me. I think there's some very good elements, but also a few missed opportunities as well.
Thank you. That kind of links quite nicely with the monitoring of the impact of remote learning and education. But I don't know, Mark, if you think we've got any time for that question.
Well, I wanted to sort of dig into a bit further on what you mentioned there about solo taxonomy. Now, solo taxonomy was really in vogue quite a little while ago, but I'd be really interested to sort of hear from you further about how you think how solo can tie in and how you might be engaging in sort of solo activities with your learners at Cardiff and Vale. Could you elaborate a bit further on that for me, please? Because that's really interesting, I think, because what teachers often need is not to learn so much about X, Y, and Z in PowerPoint or Teams or whatever, is actually the ideas that underpin how you approach those things. And Al loves my old it ain't so much what you do, it's the way that you do it approach. And solo as a taxonomy, I've got a lot of time for it. Tate Coles has got some fantastic blogs on those, which I'm sure you read in the past, and the likes of Lisa Ashes has written loads about it as well. So, could you okay to sort of expand on that, please, Yusuf?
Absolutely, and you have to stop me from talking on when it comes to solo, so just please butt in at any point. But essentially, one of the things I really like about the solo taxonomy, and the Bloom's taxonomy is fine, but it's very linear, whereas the solo taxonomy is very much relational. It's the idea where you got a learner and they start with no knowledge. You get them some knowledge, and then you build on that for them to apply it, evaluate it, and the highest level of it is this metacognitive creation. The idea that someone understands something so well they're able to create that. Now, going to your point, Mark, about is what you do with it. Well, the question then, I flip the question onto the lecturers to say, actually keep it simple. Think about the tools, but a great lesson is a great lesson whether it's physical or whether it's remote. How are you going to get them to metacognitively think about some of these concepts, whether it's to do with the water cycle, whether it's to do with industrial revolution? You need to think about how you're going to get them from that point and then through the cycle. And when you map that across the different assessment frameworks, you'll see that GCSE pretty much stops at that knowledge evaluation end where you're starting to evaluate, but you're evaluating at quite a superficial level at GCSE. When you get to A level, you're having to evaluate at an in-depth level of understanding strengths and weaknesses, the impact of them, but also potentially creating something with that information as well. So how do you do that in an online lesson? When it comes to questioning and deep questioning and the way in which you question, which is us, we can ask some fantastic, as you asked some great questions here already, and the way in which we question through simple articulating from teacher to learner is so powerful. And that is simply a screen and a mic in the way in which you ask the question. And when we go back to what we're talking about in terms of asynchronous learning, the challenge, the gauntlet we set is how much of that stuff that's knowledge-based, where they can go away and read it, watch something, how much of that can happen outside of the live lesson? And how quickly can we get into the taxonomy? And they use the taxonomy a lot more down under in Australia than here. Sort of like you said, it was in vogue. It went out a little bit for whatever reason. But how deeply can you access that taxonomy when you've got a live lesson? So for example, if you've got a lesson on the water cycle, could you have shown them that beforehand? Maybe you should give them a little video clip, and you come in and say, well, where can it be used? Where has it been used effectively? What areas benefit from that? What project could we start off with? And I think that's where it's the how you do it, which has to underpin the philosophy of where the remote learning strategy is. And I know my colleague Hannah, you know Hannah very well. She often talks about this, that the digital transformation strategy is only as good as the underpinning vision behind it. If it's simply about putting tools and software packages into a mix and putting them into some sort of getting them more and more and more, then that's not going to work. What you need is to have how do you define yourself as an education institution? Where are you trying to get to your learners, and what tools are then going to help you assist in that journey?
I completely agree. And what I love about your response there as well, Yusuf, isn't that you're just talking specifically about solo. You're actually taking on board lots of things. You mentioned the benefits of solo versus Bloom's and things, but you're talking about other learning approaches like flip learning, and then flipping the flip, because as you know, top level in solo is that relational knowledge, isn't it? And so, in a flip learning world, actually, can our learners then take that relational knowledge to create the resources so that they're showing their wider knowledge, understanding, and research around those topical areas as well? I mean, that's a fantastic response. Thank you very much, Yusuf. Zena, did you want to jump in with a question for Al?
I'm going to go back to my monitoring question, because I think it's been asked quite a lot in my school, certainly. What's monitoring the impacts of remote education would you suggest?
It's all right.
Is everything all right?
I'm just glad you're not asking me on that taxonomy question, so we're all good.
There you go. Yeah, crack on with the questions. Yusuf's back now.
It was around suggestions for systems for monitoring the impact of remote education and learning.
It's a really
it comes down to what you're monitoring, but essentially show impact.
I mean, it's a question that we chewed over, and I think in every educational setting across our trusts and other trusts that I've been involved in, it's kind of gradually shaping, but it is a really difficult one, because at the starting point, the questions, what deems a successful experience, and what are our objectives? And for many, the hardest part of that journey was actually evidencing impact. So it started off with the measure of impact was simply engagement. And of course, that isn't necessarily a measure that guarantees any level of success, because we can all connect and listen to white noise. Frankly, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. But engagement and continued engagement implies there's some form of desire to continue. And in some of our schools where we've got our alternative provision, we've got young people that struggle in mainstream education settings for behavior or learning reasons, and so actually that in itself is a huge measure. And of course, whether you're a Teams or a Google one, in Teams, using things like Insight is a really useful addition as part of your Teams experience. So rather than sending out an assignment and waiting to see if a young person's going to send it back, you can actually see if they've engaged and been involved in the lessons and process. So that's kind of one thing about that kind of engagement side. I think the key bit really is on that kind of expanding it to that kind of, we refer to that kind of feedback loop of, once the young people are delivering feedback, teachers are able to capture that quickly and respond and look to develop it. And I think it probably comes up to the main point. I'm not sure that the product or the tool you use is that important. It's more about the measures of whether the young person is engaged and is building on skills that were discussed earlier to move things forward. And we had a conversation at primary about, again, this was some months ago, about how do you kind of move that journey forward. And it was actually, they're acquiring different skills, not the skills we planned. There's skills in terms of language skills, project work with parents, developing other kinds of awareness, but they're all actually measurable in terms of the child is acquiring the ability to, whether it's language or additional motor skills and other aspects. So I think it's really about, it's obviously age related for a start, but I think we get wrapped up in the technology bit. The technology is just the platform to actually go and do, as has been discussed, what teachers always do, which is about setting a way of challenging and appropriate questioning to get evidence and confidence that a child is acquiring skills and that knowledge is embedded, finding ways to test and build on that as part of a framework. And it might be that the journey is a slightly different order than would have been done within the school to allow for resources and capacity. But the rocket science, I don't think there's as much rocket science as maps is being changed on that. The challenge is about how you can kind of actually deliver that questioning and get that confidence and evidence. And I sometimes worry, and again, I always preface these things by saying, I'm the magpie that grabs the feedback from different teachers and don't always have to be the one that suffers it at the front of the class trying to do it myself. But I think for some, those that have kind of not let the technology rule the conversation, but have just said, actually, I'm going to do what I do and we'll find the simplest way. And then where appropriate, we might try some different things, are the ones that have actually navigated it best. And I think equally with schools, those schools that tried to put the kind of impact measure on too quickly, perhaps were the ones that didn't meet the best objectives. I'm thinking back, and Mark will know something that we've discussed before, of the process in the UAE. They were kind of ahead of the curve to the UK, largely because of lots of the international schools. Let's be honest, not only was the COVID wave there first, but they had the luxury of a better tech install base for their learners as well. But when the MOE started to put the framework in place in terms of how they were going to measure and monitor the impact of remote learning, it was much more shaped around, are you meeting the needs in terms of delivering content? Are you meeting the needs in terms of well-being, in terms of engagement? It wasn't explicitly trying to wrap it down to the minutiae. And I think it's that broader sense of, are we meeting the needs of our learners? Are they consistently engaged? Are we getting some form of measure that staff have confidence that children are moving forward? Are we meeting our well-being needs? So for our vulnerable learners, are we using and still able to ensure that there's that continuity of daily discussion and dialogue? Have we looked at technology to help bridge and preempt problems ahead? So when we went back to June time, July, was technology being used for transitions to give young people in year 6 a confidence about that move up to year 7, familiarity in what they would expect and how they were going to do things? Have we considered about how technology can be broadly used, and at the same time, what have we used that in a broader sense to be most efficient? You know, and the efficiency one is still, well, it's a moving feast of the expectation on teachers, so it's probably a hard one to measure. And I might be going slightly off on tangent there, but you know, I think it's that kind of sense of, is it about the technology or is it about the normal measures that a teacher would apply to get confidence in terms of what's successful in a learning experience?
Now, I think what you highlight there, Al, really, really clearly is the breadth that's required. It's not about a one-size-fits-all approach. And as we approach the end of this show, I think it's actually probably a good time to jump in to what I think is probably, for me, the question I'd like answered the most, really, because there's a pretty contentious sentence, I think, inside the guidance from Ofsted, which I think is pretty ideological. And so I wanted to share the sentence with you, so I'll just bring that up onto the screen so everybody can see it, and I've actually gone and highlighted it for you just for the avoidance of doubt. And they say, the aim of education is to deliver a high quality curriculum so that pupils know more and remember more. And so my final question for you both, please, is to what extent do you agree with this? I mean, you kind of have, Al, in your response there, talked about things which are not just about those things, the importance of well-being, a broad and balanced education, which isn't just about the curriculum. So would you like to go first, Al, and just elaborate on that a little bit?
I'll do a quick one to give you a bit more time on that. I think that the simple answer is, I do agree that education, one of the impacts of a good education is that young people acquire knowledge and skills. But to suggest that it's kind of there as that kind of front line, I would say it's much more about the broader development of a child, their ability to understand, question, challenge, go away and find, give them the tools to actually go away and generate that knowledge themselves. And I think from that point of view, I think it devalues in some regard. I'm sure it's best intentioned, and it's ultimately that high level of, we just want to make sure our children are still learning whilst they're at home. But I think in the way that it's presented there, I think it really undermines the key, most important values that most people are involved in education for.
Thank you for your response, Al. No comment from me. Yusuf, did you want to add on to Al's comment there, please?
Yeah, I do think it's pretty poor, if I'm honest, because I think it's very limiting in terms of and given what Ofsted stands for and the position Ofsted holds within England in terms of setting the agenda for schools, given the positioning it is within the document, it's very high up in the document. So if you're reading out the first few things, it's one of the first things you'll see. It's very much leaning towards that education being you got a child or someone who hasn't got information, you're just going to put information into their head. That's a very poor way of, and a very limiting way of viewing education. I agree that that's part of the education process, but we just spoke about the taxonomy, the SOTA taxonomy. One of the taglines for Cardiff and Vale College is developing skilled and employable people. And we dial onto that then. What we want people who are going to improve society, who are going to improve the positions that we're currently in, who are going to raise the next generation above and be the shoulders who people stand on for better. You're not going to do that by getting people to know more and remember more. There are plenty of people who know lots of things and remember things who aren't very good at applying what they know. So I'd say, looking at the SOTA taxonomy there and giving that a score on an A-level grade, it better get an E, to be honest with you. On a GCSE framework, you might give it a D, but it's not for that depth. But yeah, and I think I get away with saying that because I'm in Wales at the moment.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Can I ask you the same question, Zina? What are your thoughts on that?
It's pretty clumsy, to be honest, and very. I'll have to think about it. Come back to me in a second. I'm going to ask you what you think first, because I switched off for 2 seconds there, and I was thinking, hold on a minute. I looked at the time and went, how am I going to do this in 1 minute? And then you came to me.
Well, I'll jump in. And I caught a webinar last week from ASCL, actually, chaired by Jeff Barton and Julian. I forget his surname now, but you guys might remember it. He's the CEO of the Academy's Enterprise Trust. And there were lots of other fantastic speakers on the webinar. I learned lots from it. But given the number of schools in the Academy of Enterprise Trust, it's the largest trust in England, it's humongous. And the way that Jeff Barton sort of wrapped up the comments that he made was the unexpected F word about remote education, which is fun. because actually the things that we remember, I haven't taught for a few years, but the things that I remember from when I was a kid, it wasn't how much it wasn't the trigonometry or the algebra that I had to support my own children with this morning. It was helpful, and I've got that there as my basis, and it's really, really important. But the things that really I remember lots from, both by time teaching and from when I was a child in school myself, it was the things that we did. It was the trips to London. It was the school choir trip down to the Gower Coast every summer at the end of the summer term. It was the staff have talent competitions that I used to standing on stage singing Lady Gaga. It was all those different things which ties into the relationships, which bring those bonds with those learners that make them want to do the best by you. So you have those positive behaviors for learning in the classroom. They want to do well for you. They get excited about your subject and all those different things as well. So I like Yusuf and Al. I think it is hugely important and massively important when it comes to learners going to school. We go to school to learn things, but that isn't the be all and end all. School is far more than just cramming your head full of information. And I'm yet to meet a teacher who got into teaching to stuff kids' heads full of knowledge. It goes to the sort of comments that Yusuf was making earlier about improving life chances, about making the world a better place, and give people skills to transform their local communities, and all these different things, which is all just part and parcel of that holistic approach to education. So, like we said right at the beginning of the show, at the top of the show this evening, although I missed a bit of it, sorry. But it's as people said, guests were saying at the top of the show, there's lots more to this than just a one size fits all approach, and the guidance, whilst showcasing some great advice, could go a fair amount further in thinking about the ways in which we can do things. Where are the mentions, for example, we've talked about team stuff. Where's the mention of things like together mode, to give students that opportunity to feel like they're actually in the room together? I mean, obviously you can't look left to right and actually see each other, but where's the mention of those sort of things? Where's the mention of well-being, the ways in which you can do well-being check-ins easily, and all those sort of things, and the mindfulness around it. So I'm mindful we're over time, and I'm always one to get on a soapbox once I get started. So I'm going to shut up now and pass over to you, Zena, just to wrap things up.
No, I'm in an absolute agreement with you, to be honest with you. And I'm going to keep it really brief because we are running 2 minutes over. But for me, education is about also helping young people find their way in the world. Okay, where do they belong in this big, wide world? What skills do they need? What character do they need? And it's not just about credentials. It's not just about opening their minds and filling it up and then saying, off you go, find your way. We've had lots of conversations about young people who've left school with 5 GCSEs, grade 9, and come out and go, what's rent? What's mortgage? What are interest rates? How do I do this? What do I do? And really struggle with that. And of course, we need to consider things like mental well-being and emotional well-being. I could go on. Now I'm on my soapbox. But I just want to say a thank you, huge thank you to Al and Yusuf for joining us this evening. It's been wonderful. We've had some great people in the chat. And hopefully this carries on Twitter or other social media platforms afterwards. But if you've got any questions that you want us to pass on to our panelists at some point later on, do just stick them in the chat and we will do our best.
Brilliant, Steph. Yeah, thank you very much indeed to Al and Yusuf. And just before we go, we'd like to remind our audience where people can find you. Al, where can people find you online?
At Al Kingsley _edu. And Mark, can I just say thank you for the mental picture of you on stage singing Lady Gaga? That will last with me for some time.
It wasn't just me, and I wasn't in a sequin jacket. It was Clevedon School's House Have Talent competition. Yusuf will be aware of Clevedon School, and having taught quite close to there at St. Catherine's back in the day. So, yes, thanks for that, Al. And I'm sure you'll remind me of that many times into the future. Thank you. Yusuf, where can people find you? Obviously, online and social media and those sorts of places, please.
Yeah, so if anyone wants to drop me a line or connect, it's at Teacher Nudge, and I'm more than happy to talk about things or race to online learning or anything really. Just have a look at my things I'm interested in. But yeah, just want to thank you both again, Zena and Mark. And Zena, amazing stuff right there at the beginning. And we won't tell Mark anything that you said about him at the start.
It's all true. Thank you very much, everybody. So that's it for this week's episode of UKEduStories. We'll be back again with topical issues to be discussed with guests on the show next week, as it is every week, Thursday night, 7 till 8 p.m. And don't forget, if you haven't yet, to hit the subscribe button, which I think is down there, but I might be wrong. It's somewhere down here. And we'll look forward to you joining us in a week's time, 7 till 8 p.m. In the meantime, keep yourself safe. Find some time for yourself. Don't work too hard, and look after yourselves, everybody. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.